Digicom Weekly Growth Marketing Podcast.
Hey guys, it's Heyman from Digicom here with another week of our growth marketing podcast. This week we're going to talk about a number of different tests you can run across various ad platforms. If you like our content, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, or give us a follow. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of testing creatives and optimizing Facebook, the importance of running isolated tests, unleashing the potential of dynamic ads, talking through ad copy, audience segmentation, budget optimization. So we have a lot.
All right, let's talk about the importance of creative testing, and not that it was not important earlier, but I think it has got even more important, especially after the iOS update. Hemant, you want to talk through the changes that you've noticed and how aggressive creative testing can really make a lot of difference in the final results you get?
Yeah, I think, post iOS, like Facebook's been arming their algorithm to essentially figure out a lot of the audiences you should be going after. So post iOS, we started to see broad audiences work a lot better than niche audience. And that's also primarily because like CPMs aren't taxed as much as, targeting interest audience or lookalikes. Sometimes we're seeing like 30-40% lower CPMs on broader audiences. But it's very important to pair the right creatives for your brand. And, there's a number of different creative styles that we'll talk through to test, like video, static, GIF. But adding into that, something I like to do is add an attribute column to your creative report. So say you hop into an ad platform, you download you download all of the ads across the ad platforms. What I would do is create a column in Excel where you're tagging the attributes of each ad. Maybe it's the color, maybe it's the type of messaging, and then pivot that data to see what attributes drive the highest converting creatives or have the best engagement. And using that type of segmentation strategy, it can really inform you, and you can find out certain things about colors or messaging, or if it's a product shot or an experience shot, in terms of like what works in your ad creative strategy.
Awesome. Really cool you called out about, tracking those attributes for all creatives. Been guilty myself, and we see that all the time. We begin testing, you've just got a few creatives, but very soon you have a bunch of creatives you've tested, and it's so hard to keep track of what's working, what are the common denominators. So I think that's one key takeaway. Take note of what's working within those creatives and then find out the common denominators.
Kate, so, you're running a number of accounts. All of them have pretty solid, substantial budgets, 100K plus. And when you're running these tests, what's the importance of running isolated tests? Like, how are you leveraging a testing strategy across the partners you're working with?
Yeah, I mean, it really does depend, one, on the partner. So like the client, obviously different products require different tests, like different creatives. Not everything is going to work for everyone. So the ads that we make for a grocery store are going to be vastly different than the creatives that we do for a skincare company. Kind of goes without saying. But even like with all those differences, the main thing that kind of like ties it all together when you're looking at creative testing is that structure. So like it's really important to have everything isolated, because if you're running an ad and you're going to think, I'm going to test with this new copy that we have, I'm going to test it in this new audience, and this is a new product, chances are the results you get are not going to be very relevant and or helpful to you, because you're basically mixing in like 6 different variables. So it's almost like you need to have like a control group, basically. So you're making sure that the copy that you're running with is copy that you've either used before or you just know works well for you, the audience that you're delivering your creative to, which is arguably one of the most important points, because if you're delivering to a brand new audience, you have no idea how they're going to react to your brand. Chances are your creative may not do very well at all. So you might end up writing something off that actually could be very helpful to you. So main important part really is just like isolating one variable, because at the end of the day, if you're mixing stuff all together, it's going to be really hard to pinpoint what either drove performance or what might have tanked your performance. So focusing on that one variable is just going to give you like a very clear answer.
And what about budgets? How are you splitting out budgets for your tests?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the way that you do creative testing. There's like a couple different options. A personal favorite of mine and kind of how we do it here at Digicom is essentially you're taking whatever your variable is. If you have several different versions of that, you're putting it in a separate campaign that's just designed for creative. So you're setting aside a specific budget to kind of factor in, like, you need to be looking for new ads, new creatives to run, because eventually whatever you are running is going to fatigue. So setting aside a budget and also kind of understanding that like not everything may work, but if you do have a budget set aside, you are going to eventually start finding wins for these like specific creatives, but making sure that they're separate from the rest of your normal ads and like evergreen campaigns, because otherwise, if you dump them in there with everything else, they're really not going to get the chance to basically learn.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, like having a separate budget is always important because, like there are variables we can control, but then there's also market externalities, and having a separate budget allows us to test through the variables we can control in specific market conditions, and those conditions might change time to time. If you take your tests and just roll it out across your evergreen campaigns and there's some sort of external market factor that we're not accounting for, it could just throw your entire, campaign strategy off or tank performance.
Just to add to this, yesterday I got this question from one of our clients, and I think this is common with almost all new accounts that we work with. What do you start with? What do you think is the best thing to test first? And as much as we'd like to have that, silver bullet strategy or that direction, if you don't know which products really sell well for your store, you haven't sold any, or it's just friends and family, and then you're also testing, the ad platform, the creatives and the copy. If you have some, intuitive data from your market of what's working well, it's just picking a product and running with it and running some consistent tests before you take a call whether that's working for you or not. So there's definitely room for testing if you have enough budget there. But then if you do not know any of the variables, the best thing to do is start with one and test it out through.
Yeah, and I think, with that one test, like what I like to do is identify which landing pages start to convert first. That's like part of my strategy. I know some of the team wants to figure out copy or creative, but basically, like if we're launching a new brand, maybe they've never been in market and we've never really learned anything yet. I would I like to split homepage versus product page versus PLP, and then test the same messaging across and, use the same audience, or and when I say same messaging, I mean you might have 4 ads with 4 different sets of messaging that we're trying to figure out, but I run those same creatives across all of the landing pages to identify, okay, does this work, does this not work, and then from there start to isolate and identify, is it the creative, is it the landing page that is driving performance. Once we kind of figure that out, then it's iterative and audience testing and kind of building on those learnings. Danae, I know you like to use dynamic creatives. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what's your testing strategy?
Absolutely. I love dynamic creative, especially on a newer account, because you have so many different variables and manually looking for, what copy angles would work, what creatives would work. I think it's best to kind of put them into a dynamic creative, let the machine learning, the algorithm give you direction. I especially like to run that to a broader audience first, see which audience, which target age groups are responding, if you're getting engagement, if people are clicking through, going to the website and taking actions. And then because we have the ability to break down those numbers from the dynamic creatives, look out what copy is working with which ad, and then slowly split them apart, run those isolated tests that we just spoke about. So I think it's just giving a head start. There's both approaches work, but if you have a bunch of creatives, I think throwing them into a dynamic creative really works well.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. And what about format testing?
Right. I think this was something that I realized pretty late after running so much media for clients, and it's the way how you look at auctions. Every single ad that is displayed goes through an auction process. Facebook always prioritizes the kind of placement and media, shows that to people who are most likely to view that sort of media. So if you're viewing a lot of videos, you will see more video ads. If you engage on a lot of carousel ads, you will see more carousel ads. That's how the platform works. So having a mix of all those formats in your ad sets, it just gives you enough opportunities to be part of that auction. So if there are some carousels you don't have a carousel in, you are not going to be displayed there. It's just creating more odds of you winning those auctions and being seen.
Yeah, I agree very much with that, especially for like carousel placements, because like sometimes they only appear in certain areas. And if you don't have a version of carousel running, you might just never be able to test those specific placements. Kate, what are your thoughts on, copy angle testing?
Many thoughts, I guess, but in general, I mean, I think it really helps you narrow down your value prop. So, like, one of the things that we like to do when we're first either like onboarding clients or just looking for new things to test is really like sitting down with them and digging into like what makes your product, what sets it apart from competitors. And then, like, once you have those value props in hand, so whether it's like the price or, like the actual product itself, if it's something new in the market, taking that and then you're applying essentially that like one value prop across all these different styles of copy. So again, like you don't want to be flooding like every single value that you have to offer across like 10 different copies, because then once again, you're not going to be able to pinpoint like what is that one thing that's really getting people to your site, getting them to buy your product, because that like whatever that star quality is, that's essentially what you're going to be iterating on when it comes to doing even more creative testing. So like making it very easy on yourself from the beginning and just figuring out like, okay, this is the one thing and we know that this style of copy works. So obviously like there's a bunch of different angles listed here that you can do. Personally, I've seen like testimonials work really well if it's a product that's very like kind of a one-time purchase or something that is maybe more expensive. So if it's something like a beauty product, if you're putting a customer testimonial up there, that's really helping like build a sense of trust with the person that may be buying this product. Whereas like for our one client that does groceries, you don't necessarily need to say like this food is really good, because usually people can kind of get that for themselves. So that's kind of where you're going to like lean towards maybe a different value prop. So maybe you call out like, they have free shipping, other stuff like that. So it's just kind of figuring out like what style of copy works well for you, and then also like what style of copy works best with the value prop that you're pushing.
Cool, thanks. Vinay, you have anything to add?
Yep, absolutely. One of those, copy angles that we talk less about on, taking that emotional story angle where you're not talking about any features or benefits. And an example would be, there's maybe, usual coffee would cost you $10. Here's a new coffee that is probably costing you $100. When you're making that product differentiation and you're now tapping into an audience that doesn't really have that issue with the price of $100 coffee, they're looking for something else. Either it has to be a very specific benefit that nobody else in the market is has with their products, and if that's not there, then the angles that really work, or the approach that really works, is taking that story angle of how that product can increase your social status. And it's not directly implied obviously, but when you're selling $100 coffee, you don't really talk about features and benefits, because it becomes much more than a $10 coffee. So something to test that would be based on the ticket size. These are definitely higher ticket values, $100, $1,000. You're not talking about what will you get immediately, put in $10, get the value out of it. So like a Mercedes commercial, or a BMW commercial, or a holiday. The holiday is not about you just getting on a plane and here are the places you'll visit and this is what you'll eat. It's about that fun. It's about those moments that you're spending, and then it's about the pictures that you're posting to your IG that all of your friends, family, and other people see it. So that social status implication, I think that's what is a good approach to sell high value products, and definitely a copy angle that should be tried first.
So selling the lifestyle and selling the imagery, the story behind over just benefits. Yeah, that works especially well, anything with like travel, or if you're aspiring to be in, like if you're a brand that wants to focus on specific like lifestyle values. Yeah, I think the story kind of, makes sense. What are your guys' thoughts in terms of like audience segmentation, running interest broad lookalikes? Like, how do you guys like to split? How do you guys like to test?
I mean, personally, for me, this is something I normally try to figure out even before we like jump into the actual creative part of testing, because again, like I was saying before, if you're delivering a creative to an audience that doesn't really care, like obviously it's not going to do well. So knowing which audience works for you and is like receptive to your product or what you're selling is like very key before you start even figuring out what exactly that audience likes about your product. So typically we'll just take like whatever our top performing audience is, or like if we're coming in on an account that's previously been worked on, kind of like parsing through, figuring out what's most successful from what they've already tested, and then doing creative testing based like specifically within that audience before you kind of open that up towards like whatever else they may be running towards, because that's going to give you the best indication of what's working. But in terms of like testing even audiences, I've typically found, especially now that like iOS is a thing of the past, the broader the audience you have, the better it's going to do. So that doesn't mean like you have to just do a run of network completely open. You can still factor in things like interest, things like lookalikes, but the more like broad you make those. So if you're having an interest audience, basically just dumping in like as many as you think are relevant or helpful to your campaign, because then it's going to give Facebook a lot better chance to sort of like target the users that you are looking for. So typically we find success of like if we have an interest audience that's makeup and we have an interest audience that's skincare, if you combine the two and like run that against the other two, usually the broader version ends up doing better.
Yeah, I think especially post iOS, like Facebook's done, maybe we aren't able to target the same way as we did, especially like back pre-print Cambridge Analytica days. Those days were fun because you could just set up targeting and it's always finding the right users if you're just thinking about it. Now it's just like the Facebook algo is better with broader audiences overall.
Right. I remember seeing under audience behavior, use credit cards in the last 15 days, 30 days. that used to be, I think, as close you can get to your target audience. With some newer accounts, I think ad accounts that haven't spent any media, the pixel hasn't learned. Usually broad audiences don't work or don't pick up as fast as you'd like because the ad account doesn't have enough functional or performance-based data. So that's running an interest there to start with. I think it gives you a head start and gives you better performance. And then once the pixel and the account has learned about conversions, maybe switching to broad, testing those out with different age ranges definitely works better.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. What about like budget optimization and like bid strategies? Like personally, I like to run ABO, but Kate and Vinay, I know you guys have tested CBO quite a bunch. Like I like to have, control over the budget split. That's why I prefer to run ABO, but what are your guys' thoughts? What are you guys seeing across your clients?
I mean, the typical answer, it depends. But if you do run the CBO, I think that is helpful, like especially if you have a campaign where a lot of your creatives are the same. So like some of our dynamic campaigns will run CBO just because like there's not a lot of difference in who we're targeting and what we're targeting them with. So we kind of let Facebook do its job of optimizing. I will say there is like a little bit of control that you can do for audiences in CBO. There's options to do like spend caps or spend minimums. So there is some room to play with that a little bit and kind of like force it where you want to go. I think typically ABO ends up working well for us if we are testing like a lot of different variables or like what we're testing is vastly different compared to the other ad set in the campaign, because then in that case like Facebook may in particular just decide that they like this one audience, whether it's successful or not, they're going to funnel all your spend there. So it really does help to have control over that to kind of like pull back if performance isn't good and if a different audience is doing really well, pushing up budgets there. But usually if it's like not a lot of variety in the campaign, you can typically do pretty well on a CBO.
Cool. Thanks for breaking that down that way.
I've also kind of restricting yourself or not trying to use too much CBO, especially in the test phases, because if you have lower budgets and you've not yet figured out, or probably you're not getting enough volume of conversions, it also puts you in a spot where the spend could be pushed towards, one of those ad sets and the other ad sets aren't learning enough because then they don't have enough spend and then they don't have enough conversion. So kind of keeping that in mind, I think once we know that we drive sufficient volumes, then letting CBO take over and maybe some training wheels, putting those spend caps here and there, that works really well.
Cool. Thank you.
Really want to talk about this one last bit strategy. I learned it a few years back. It's called the bully method. It's, I think, a brilliant advertiser called Tim Bird. He's into a lot of high spending media campaigns, but essentially the strategy is if you have a lot of budget, and I would say a lot of budget to waste and test, but the strategy entails where you switch from automatic bidding to a manual bid. And once you've identified that you have decent conversions, you've identified the creatives that are working, your landing pages are optimized, you switch to a manual mode. And the way you start bidding is close to probably 20 or 30 times the average bid or your product amount. So if you're selling something for $200, you could ideally bid for $2,000 or $3,000 as well. Now, not that you end up paying that amount, you always pay the next dollar to the second last highest bidder. But what it essentially does is when you're bidding so high, the CPMs for your audiences will go high because you're willing to spend that money. All the other advertisers that are also targeting the same audiences will start seeing their CPMs go up and the costs go up and the performance go down. Usually this is the part where the bully terms comes in, that a lot of advertisers who are not willing to spend that amount of money and fight in the same competition, they will stop ads and they will chicken out. And then the moment this starts happening, you have fewer people in the auction, and then you would start seeing your CPA going down. Again, this is more of like those end strategies that you've done everything optimization and then you try this. I've definitely seen this work on really high spends, but then you also have to probably monitor your ads every second minute because you're spending so much and you're manually bidding.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like pushing out competition, and that like oftentimes with like branded or like competitor conquest keywords, it's like similar where you're just pushing up the competitor's branded keywords. So they start to pull back and, oftentimes it hurts like the competitor, but it also costs you a lot if, click-through rates and conversion rates aren't high enough to support like the media buying costs. Cool. Well, Kate and Vinay, thank you for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you guys would like more information, check out our website, digicom.io, or feel free to email me directly at heyman@digicom.io.